welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing a deep forensic dive into one of football's absolute most feared striking partnerships. You know, when you think of legendary duos, you're probably picturing grace, blistering pace, maybe some intricate tactical link-ups. But today, we are talking about pure, unadulterated physical dominance. We're talking about Chris Sutton and John Hartson at Celtic. Okay, let's dive into this. Back in the early 2000s, these two turned the penalty area into a literal battlefield. Seriously, watching them lead the line was like witnessing an experiment in sheer terror for opposing defenses. They didn't just casually challenge you for the ball. Oh no, they made you fight for every single inch of turf. They completely transformed the box from the space of neat tactical maneuvering into an absolute war zone, leaving defenses across Scotland and Europe just totally battered.
Part 1. The Bruisers of Parkhead, the myth of the target man.
Because the reality is, they didn't just play the game, they bullied it into submission. I mean, we're all so used to that refined, surgical aesthetic of modern strikers, right? The guys who just glide between the lines and score with delicate finesse. Well, Sutton and Hartson were the absolute antithesis of that. They left their opponents not just beaten on the scoreboard, but physically and mentally exhausted.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the massive forensic error people make when talking about them. To call them mere target men, just big bruisers you aim long balls at, completely misses the magic. Their partnership was actually a highly sophisticated, meticulously constructed piece of tactical engineering. These were incredibly intelligent footballers who knew exactly how to weaponize their physical gifts. Which brings us to Part 2, a tactical masterclass, dissecting the anatomy of the partnership. When you juxtapose the two, it's best to think of John Hartson as the hammer and Chris Sutton as the scalpel. It kind of sounds contradictory for two massive forwards, doesn't it? But they played incredibly distinct, highly complementary roles. They weren't just running around duplicating efforts. They were contrasting forces that combined to create an absolutely unsolvable problem for defenders. Let's break down Hartson first, the unstoppable force. We're talking about a pure, old-school powerhouse who could hold the ball up under intense pressure and just spin seasoned center backs with these deceptive bursts of strength. Picture him completely shrugging off massive defenders on huge European nights just to unleash a clinical, uncompromising strike. But honestly, his greatest tactical weapon? He acted as a literal black hole on the pitch. Defenders were so terrified of him that they naturally gravitated right into his orbit, sucking them out of position and opening up crucial gaps. And those gaps, well, that's Chris Sutton's territory, right there, the cerebral enforcer. If Hartson was the hammer, Sutton was the scalpel. Just, a scalpel attached to the handle of a sledgehammer. Because defenders were pulled into Hartson's gravity, Sutton used impeccable timing to exploit the chaos. He'd arrive in the box at the exact right millisecond. He knew precisely when to drift wide, when to drop into the hole, and, this is a big one, he possessed an incredible vision for the final pass. A vision that was so often overlooked simply because he was such an imposing physical guy. So the crucial point is the impossible tactical dilemma this created. Just put yourself in a center back's boots for a second. What do you actually do? If you mark them tight, they use their immense physicality to roll you and drive straight at the goal. But if you drop off to give yourself some space, they instantly switch gears, using their high intelligence to link up and carve you wide open. It was literally a lose-lose situation. So let's move to Part 3. Psychological warfare specifically within the old firm crucible. They brought something to that historic rivalry that we can define as controlled nastiness. Sutton and Hartson weren't just out there playing to score goals, they were playing for total dominance. They played to break their opponent's will. Against rivals like Rangers, where the tension is just electric, they would firmly stand their ground, win every brutal header, and systematically make defenders second-guess every single challenge. They set a physical tone that acted as a psychological anchor for the entire Celtic squad. Because in football, high-pressure games are decided by moments of resolve. In a massive derby, tactics can completely go out the window, and it all boils down to who actually wants it more. Because Sutton and Hartson visibly intimidated the opposition, they provided their own midfield and defense with the psychological safety they needed to play their game. It infused the rest of the team with unbelievable confidence to step up in those absolutely crucial, high-stakes moments. Let's zoom out a bit for Part 4, the legacy of the Titans, looking at a completely different kind of brilliance. And this brilliantly illustrates the contrast between their style and the modern game. Today, we're all obsessed with fluid interchange, high mobility, and relentless pressing systems, right? But Sutton and Hartson implemented an anti-tactical plan. They specialized. By utterly dominating the air, winning second balls, and forcing a pure physical contest, they completely neutralized the tactical advantages of more technically gifted opponents. They forced teams to abandon their own sophisticated plans and play their brutal game instead.
It really comes down to this. Football is a contest of wills, just as much as it's a contest of skills. Sutton and Hartson set a standard that is incredibly difficult to replicate, mainly because their entire strategy forced opponents to ask themselves a terrifying question. Am I actually tough enough to even be on the pitch with these two today?
So as we watch the modern, data-driven game evolve toward high mobility, we really have to ask, is the Bruiser archetype permanently consigned to history? Or is there still a place for a partnership built fundamentally on unapologetic physical dominance to disrupt everything? It's a fascinating question to ponder. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning what you see on the pitch.